The last chapter of Act 2 of The Failed Swordsman of Sylvania, Glast Showdown, 3 days ago, some time after Ed woke up from his stupor, although he had completed everything he could not do in the previous 10 days, but he regretted that he could not practice during those 10 days. He also thought, Glast Showdown must have started by now, but he regretted that he had not increased his magic engineering stat. Because for further training in magic engineering, he needed blueprints and materials. But he then immediately realized something. A way to increase his magic engineering stats significantly. The final stage of the Glast Showdown has 4 phases. Among them, the one with the highest difficulty is Phase 3, the Secret Laboratory. The boss of that stage, the Soul Library, Librarian Reina, is so powerful that without the Sword Saint ritual, she is difficult to defeat, but that is a problem for Taylor to solve. While Ed himself was interested in the contents of the Soul Library, that place contained all kinds of valuable magic engineering formulas. He remembered there were at least as many as 2 digits. There were even 2 formulas to make legendary grade magic engineering items. Ed knew it was risky, but if he was not alone there, he thought, it should be fine, right? At the Sylvania Academy, at that time during class, Professor Glast's voice was heard saying, Adele from Class B and Isla from Class C are expected to enter Class A next semester. This academic year clearly has many talented individuals. Even if they move to a higher class midway, their studies will still not be interrupted, so he asked them not to worry. While listening carefully, Lortel then thought, there are many talented students. Class A so far has 3 people, and in the next semester it will reach 5 people, whereas before the school term that Professor Glast held, the A class didn't even exist. Isla's combat ability may not be much, but she is said to have great sensitivity to celestial magic. In the middle of her musings, Lortel was then surprised when she saw Zik suddenly stand up. Professor Glast also saw that. He then asked, what's wrong? Zik said he was hesitant to say this, but can they really determine the criteria for entering the A class purely by talent alone? There are some students whose potential may blossom in an unexpected way through their efforts. Hearing that, Professor Glast then questioned him back, so what does he mean that he underestimates and demeans their efforts, by ignoring and messing them up like that? Zix didn't seem to expect Professor Glast to suddenly say that. He then apologized. He didn't mean to think that. Professor Glast continued. Precisely the most powerful way to mess up someone's life is to accept their still vague talents and push them carelessly. Lortel could only sigh hearing that. Before entering Sylvania, a background check was conducted by the academy professor. His obsession with talent, which even made him seem stubborn and haughty, was probably because his daughter, Professor Glast's only child, Mori, was an ordinary magician, but he put too much hope in his only child. That's a very natural thing for a parent, but Mori thinks the hope is not from her parent, but the hope of Professor Glast, the professor of the Faculty of Magic. Because of her belief, she participated in the conquest of the demon race at an inappropriate time at her too young age. Then, she met her end. She heard that it was because of this that Professor Glast became obsessed with gifted people. Most of his teaching period at Sylvania Academy was focused on researching a puzzling magic known as celestial magic. But if his past is observed again, it becomes clear, what Professor Glast was after was not celestial magic, but the person who designed the celestial magic. A person who was considered the most talented in history, the great sage of Sylvania. Perhaps the reason he wanted Isla to enter Class A was because of his celestial magic research. Amidst the struggle of her mind, Lortel was then surprised when she heard Professor Glast suddenly call her, but Professor Glast seemed a bit hesitant to convey what he wanted to tell her at the moment. This was a separate matter from the lesson, so he would call her tomorrow. Hearing that, Lortel then wondered, is this about the sage's scroll? The scroll is the main ingredient for celestial magic research, but unfortunately, whatever he said was useless. Soon she would get possession of the sage's scroll sensitivity formula. After studying for who knows how long, the class finally ended. The sage's scroll sensitivity formula would start soon. It was risky, but he was still confident of successfully completing the plan. The key to this operation was to follow Taylor's path through phases 1 to 4 to save Isla, and pick up the items left behind by him, especially, in phase 3. He had to wipe out all the items related to magic engineering in the Soul Library. He had even made a list of items that must be brought, including Glock's Eye, having the effect of temporarily exploding the amount of magic power and proficiency of all sensitivity-related skills, and Delheim's Hourglass, having the effect of being able to restore all physical conditions to a few seconds ago. These items had extremely powerful effects, but due to the difficulty of farming materials, these items could only be crafted in the later stages of the story. Anyway, they would be useless to Taylor. So he was the one who would keep them, and at the same time, he would observe Taylor's performance in Phase 4 and then return to the cabin. After that, all the plans were completed. The day when Sage's scroll sensitivity formula was used was during the Glast showdown. He told Janica that something was lost in the underground sewers, so they would look for it together. He thought Janica hated dark and narrow places, but somehow she was more proactive. He guessed that maybe she was anxious about him, and it made him feel a little reluctant, but with a reliable partner by his side. The plan was perfect. When Ed was about to return to the cabin, he was then surprised when he saw Assistant Professor Claire coming towards him, and said that Professor Glast called him. Seeing her, Ed thought he heard from Janica that she visited the cabin recently. He wondered what was the reason for this. The Sage's scroll sensitivity formula happened tomorrow. Why should it be now when it was busy? Even so, Ed then said that he understood. He didn't reply to his letter earlier because he was tired, so he guessed it must be something important. And when he arrived at Professor Glast's office, he then met someone unexpected. It was Isla. Isla then immediately became alert when she saw him. She also asked why he was here. Ed was really speechless looking at her reaction. Wasn't her reaction excessive even though he hadn't done anything yet? Her bad relationship with Ed Roth Taylor had been going on for more than 10 months. Even after that, she was targeted by him with arrows. But regardless, Ed was confused. Isla, the person who would be kidnapped when the Glast showdown started tomorrow, was even here. Then why was he called too? But he then immediately realized something. Ed then immediately rummaged through the documents on the table nearby. He seemed to be looking for something. Isla could only be shocked and confused at his sudden action. After searching for a while, he didn't find what he was looking for. Here there was nothing that could change the future to his knowledge, for things related to Ed Roth Taylor, only this document. Looking at the document he found, Ed wondered, could this be the contents of the incident reported by Assistant Professor Claire who was watching him? If so, Professor Glast might have realized what he did in Ophilus Hall, but he was still confused. What did that have to do with the current situation? In the middle of his struggle of thoughts, Ed suddenly felt something. He then immediately took out his dagger while feeling alert. Isla screamed in panic when she saw him suddenly pull out a dagger. Shortly after that, there was a sudden movement from the entrance, and Professor Glast walked in. He didn't look to be in a good mood. Seeing him coming, Isla then frantically ran towards him. She asked him for help. She was very scared seeing Ed carrying a dagger, but instead of intending to save her, Professor Glast then cast a magic. It was celestial magic, time prison. Professor Glast then released the magic towards Isla. Isla froze completely when hit by the magic as if the time in her body had frozen. Not stopping there, Professor Glast then directed it at Ed too, but Ed could react quickly. He threw his dagger which he made using engineering magic towards Professor Glast. When the dagger was close, Ed then called Mug, and the dagger suddenly lit up brightly. And a very powerful explosion was then triggered from the dagger which devoured Professor Glast alive. But it wasn't enough to kill Professor Glast. Ed also realized that. Professor Glast then praised him for understanding the situation so quickly. His response was almost too smooth. Professor Glast then returned to casting his magic. He also asked him, did he check all his research materials in such a short time? But he felt that it was strange. He couldn't possibly know his intentions just by checking a few documents. Ed immediately hid behind the table when he saw Professor Glast come out unscathed. He also asked, is suppressing him really necessary? Doesn't he just need Isla's sensitivity to celestial magic? He doesn't need to suppress him anymore since he has already fulfilled his purpose. He also promised to keep his mouth shut. Hearing his question, Professor Glast replied, he has a purpose, and this is for that purpose. So he asked him not to look too badly at this. Ed could only sigh hearing that. He lamented, could he at least explain it? This has gone too far. He even dodged with his unclear words and told him not to look too badly at this. But as he remembered Professor Glast telling him not to look too badly at this, he then thought of something. Indeed, even if he managed to get out of here, Professor Glast would not be silent. Most likely it would only further complicate the scenario. More than that, if he was kidnapped here, he would likely be locked up in a secret laboratory with Isla. This was as if he was providing a direct bus to Phase 3, realizing that, Ed was thinking, did he just let himself be kidnapped? Seeing Ed who came out of hiding, Professor Glast then asked, did he want to force a fight, or had he thought of some kind of plan? But when he saw Ed just staying still and not resisting, Professor Glast then praised his decision. It wouldn't be so bad for him. And he then froze Ed using time prison magic. Looking at Ed who had been frozen, Professor Glast then recalled his conversation with Claire. Claire at that time said, at first she doubted. But she was then surprised because he could excel academically while living in the wild, as if he lived for 48 hours a day. She couldn't even imagine how much blood and sweat he had to spend to achieve that, but Professor Glast didn't believe it at all when he heard her words. He also said that her words were different from the previous one. Before she was grumbling about Ed being some kind of mastermind or something. But now she was even amazed at him. Hearing his disbelief, Claire then showed him the crystal ball containing the recording magic, and said, she didn't expect that he could fight like this. When Professor Glast saw the recording, he also thought, judging from his fighting style seen from the crystal ball, Ed's fighting sense was extraordinary. But, that's obviously a lowly way. The lowly way is to thoroughly observe the enemy and exert all kinds of means. It's the result of effort, not talent. That expression that didn't show the slightest sign of anxiety. It reminded him of something lost in the past, his daughter who swore to confirm her path and honor her father's name. That memory came back again. Professor Glast looked very depressed when suddenly remembering that, while Professor Glast was busy struggling with his thoughts, Mug who had been hiding, then slipped away from there silently. He flew very quickly to a place. That place was Ed's cabin. He headed there because he knew there was Janica. While tasting the dishes she made, Janica thought that Ed was a little late, but what she didn't know was, she would soon get bad news related to the person he was waiting for later.